There's always conversation about an all-star White Lotus season. It must be so torturous for you because your character isn't alive anymore.
Well, yeah, from the mind of Mike White, honestly, it could happen in the afterlife. You really don't know. And on the night before we started shooting the first season, we had this big dinner and he announced that there would be a prize for the person who at the end of the shoot was the nicest person and the best actor. And they get a spin-off series. And I was like, hello? And he was like, we could just go back in time. So who knows? Maybe I could appear in flashbacks. Maybe there'll be, I don't know, parallel realms that you visit. He could really do anything. He's been on The Amazing Race and Survivor, for God's sake. That man is just like boundless.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Obsessed, the podcast. I am Kevin Fallon, here to guide you through all the TV shows, movies, and pop culture nonsense that we think is unmissable. And today we have a very fun guest. It is the Emmy-winning actor Murray Bartlett, who is currently starring in the Apple TV show Maximum Pleasure Guaranteed. And my conversation with him is about more than just that show. He's been in so many series that you love and you know him from. First and foremost, The White Lotus, where he played the spiraling manager Armand and won an Emmy for it. He's also been in The Last of Us, in that amazing episode about the romance that we all cried during. He's been in Welcome to Chippendales. He was in the TV show Looking. So we talked about all those things and more. So here's my interview with Murray Bartlett. Hi, Murray. How are you?
I'm great, Kevin. How are you?
I'm doing really well, thanks.
Are you obsessed?
I'm obsessed with you, everything you do, always. I'm really excited to talk to you about Maximum Pleasure Guaranteed, which is this great show that you are on right now on Apple TV. I have to say, it's really hard for me because I'm not used to not liking you on screen.
It's about time, isn't it?
You've been too likable for far too long.
I mean, it's kind of, I think that's what a lot of us look for as actors is like something that feels different or always trying to like vary things and, take a bit of a left turn from what we've done before. So that was one of the exciting things about this role. It's like, I have to say though, as a very sort of sensitive, empathetic person, it was really a good challenge and kind of interesting to play someone who doesn't really have any of that.
I mean, so tell the people who you play on the show and what the show is about, because like you said, it is a big departure from the kind of roles that we're used to you from.
Yeah. So Maximum Pleasure Guaranteed is sort of, it's based around this character of Paula, played by the amazing Tatiana Maslany, who's incredible in the show. And she's, feeling overwhelmed by all the things that are coming at her in her life. She's just recently divorced. She's got in a child custody battle. She's got a demanding job. A lot of the things that we are all sort of facing in our lives in different ways, but like it's not hard. I think one of the things that I love about the show is it's not hard for us to relate to being overwhelmed at this point in time. Anyway, she's also lonely. She reaches out for a connection online. And after some unexpected sort of turns of events, she is convinced she's witnessed a murder. And gets obsessed by
Thank you for that.
by trying to solve it. And in doing that, and it's a reaction to the fact that she's stressed about her life, and this sort of provides this intense sort of focus. So all her energy goes into trying to sort of follow this lead. But that following that sort of obsession that she has was trying to solve this murder leads her into this very shadowy underworld with some very shadowy characters, which brings me to Dennis, who I play, who is
the shadiest of characters,
who is of that world. He's a chameleon, really. Like he just sort of shapeshifts to get what he wants in whatever situation he's in. So it's an amazing. It's a really well written character, I think, and amazing kind of thing for an actor to have this character where you get to play all these different things through this one character.
Yeah. And what I think is really interesting about the show too is beyond this incredible murder mystery investigation is that it's really sort of forcing us to interrogate how we feel about our own internet proclivities. I'm sort of shocked, but also not surprised to see how she's judged for being a person who subscribes to a camboy, who has that being a part of her life. I mean, I'm a person who's not afraid to admit I've subscribed to an OnlyFan or two
Right.
in my life. But the idea that this is such a readily available and popular thing to do in 2026, but it is still judged, and her abilities to parent are brought into question and things like that. It's still very shocking to me that this is something that we find so provocative.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's interesting. It's still kind of like, in a way, sort of, I guess, a dirty little secret or something, which is odd because we're so sort of immersed in this kind of cyber world these days. But I think it's also particularly this like stigma we have about women's sexuality still, and that, you know, would a man be judged the way that our character of Paula is judged? I don't know.
No, they would run for office and be elected.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. It's not hard to see. So but I think, you know, it is a really fascinating thing that's so part of our culture now. People do meet, you know, find love, hook up, find connection online, and the show does sort of dive into that, you know, how amazing that is on one hand, like so incredible that you can be feeling completely alone, and then there's this whole kind of community online that you can connect with and not feel so alone. However, there are also a lot of pitfalls and you know, scams and manipulation happening in that kind of cyberspace. But yeah, it is interesting that it's I don't know, that there is a kind of like a what's the word, like a puritanical thing still about, really, you met online? I don't know. I mean, depending on who you're talking to, I guess. For a lot of us, it's normalized, particularly if you're living in a big city. That's sort of how that's one of the main ways that people connect now, bar culture, and you know, the other ways that people used to meet up, hook up, you know, find each other, is sort of taken a back seat to a certain extent.
Yeah, I mean, the amount of weddings I've gone to for gay men who met on Grindr, it's the new world.
Right. Yeah, definitely.
And you're right too, because there's an amazing scene that Tatiana Maslany has in one of the final episodes where she's fighting for custody of her daughter, and they're interrogating her about her, you know, camboy subscription and what that might say about her fitness to be a parent. And she delivers a beautiful speech about why she decided to do this. She was, you know, spiraling at a low point in her life. The stress was unmanageable. She was a single mom who's working and had no hope of ever meeting a person in real life. So this is how she found connection and validated her womanhood. And I thought that was a really, really poignant thing and a very great point that the show makes.
Yeah, it's. I mean, I think one of the things that's amazing about her performance, and one of the things I think that's amazing about this show, is that it's, you know, it is a fast-paced, sort of anxiety-provoking, kind of rollicking tale, I guess. But it's extreme at the center of it. It's extremely human, and the way that she, you know, is moving through all the things that are coming at her is extremely relatable and very human. And like, and in the scene that you're talking about, like, it's not some sort of you know, over romanticized speech. She's just like speaking from a very sort of human place that I think we can all relate to, of like feeling overwhelmed, feeling lonely, feel like trying to just like get through, just figure stuff out, you know. And I mean, it, you know, this show is it is a murder mystery, and it is sort of like, it is, I don't know that it's larger than life, because when you look at life, it's pretty large, especially at the moment. But it's, you know, it's, some of the things are quite elevated, but it's I think it's extremely relatable, because even though we're not all kind of, you know, trying to solve murders or running away from people who are, you know, trying to top us or whatever, kill us. I mean, that's maybe an Australian term.
Okay.
Not to be confused. But we're all just trying to get through. And there's something cathartic, I think, about watching a show where you can relate to someone being overwhelmed by all the life stuff that comes at us, and watching them, make mistakes, stumble through it, sort of, like it ramps up. You're like, oh, if only she don't open that door, like she keeps going. But watching someone navigate through, and hopefully we'll see in the last episode, sort of getting through to the other side. But there's something, I think there is something very cathartic about that, watching someone go through the things that at some level we're all going through in our own lives.
This week's episode is sponsored by Wildmen with Dylan Sprouse and Brendon Columbus. It's a new casual video podcast hang in a basement bar where Dylan and Brendon invite you into their group chat. The two have been best friends since college and have spent years roasting each other, arguing over everything, and somehow staying incredibly close through it all. Now, with Dylan getting ready to become a dad and Brendon planning his wedding, they've got even more to joke about and absolutely no patience for each other's nonsense. Every episode feels like you're sitting in a room with lifelong friends as they swap stories and riff on everything from pop culture to Pokemon cards, D&D, and comics, and bring on friends like Barbara Palvin, Cole Sprouse, KJ Apa, Jojo Siwa, Raven Simone, and more. Because so many of the guests are people they actually know, the conversations are relaxed, funny, and feel a lot more real than your typical celebrity interview. Check out Wildmen with Dylan Sprouse and Brendon Columbus starting July 14th on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And I want to ask you about a scene that has already aired, but it is a little bit of a spoiler. So if anyone's listening to this and doesn't want to be spoiled about the show, please fast forward. But there's a scene that happened about midway through the season that literally had me scream on my couch while I was watching this. Your character has kidnapped Tatiana Maslany's character, and we assume it's doomsday for her. You put her in a trunk, and then the trunk opens, and she has a gun, and she shoots you in the face. I'm always dying to know, what is it like to shoot a scene like that where you're being basically murdered with a gun? Like, what was that scene like for you to shoot?
I mean, the first thing that jumps to mind is like fun, but like that's not really the way you should describe something like that. Like it's, there's layers to it. Like it's obviously really intense, but there is, this is the joy also of being an actor, is you get to do these things that hopefully you never do in life, like being shot in the face. But yeah, I think also because it's, like we have some quite physical, fight scenes, and then this scene that, requires, choreography and to get it right, and like sort of intense makeup. And that stuff is like awesome. Because it is fun, because you've like, instead of a lot of the other stuff that we get to do, which is more sort of potentially heady or emotional, or it's less kind of physical. This is stuff that like you can choreograph. It's more sort of substantial in a way that you have to get right, or you want to make it the best it can be. So it's a fun kind of challenge to be like, how do we make this look really realistic? How do we get all the physical stuff to like be just so. Watching the prosthetic artists and the makeup artists do incredible stuff in like zero time, because it's 3 a.m. and we have to get this scene shot. And also do it to my stunt guy. So I have a great photo of me and him standing next to each other in identical clothes, both with our faces blown off. But so that is, even though it's a really dark, or it's kind of darkly funny, really, in some ways, depending on how you receive it. But it's there's some layers of it that are very dark, but it's fun to do that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I find this to be a really interesting new role for you when you look at your resume and in your career thus far, because I've watched you in shows like The White Lotus and Welcome to Chippendales and Looking and The Last of Us and now this. And you play queer characters, but they're never like the cliche, stereotypical gay best friend kind of thing that a lot of people sort of criticize Hollywood for always reverting to. And I'm curious to hear from you how you've been able to carve that out where you are getting to play characters that at least sexually you identify with, which is rare on its own, but have them be this spectrum of real interesting people that aren't the cliche and stereotype.
I think I've been super fortunate to have been, offered jobs by people who don't write the characters that way. And then, I always am looking with a gay character to, how can it veer away from stereotypes or away from any kind of old tropes? Like how can this character be just, as three-dimensional as possible? And that, like I love it. There is a place for stories about sexuality, and there's a place sounds wrong, but there's like stories about sexuality can be amazing. Don't get me wrong, but I love the fact that we are moving slowly in the direction where queer characters anywhere on the spectrum are just amazing characters, and that their queerness doesn't have to be at the center of the story. Not that that's not a great thing. It can be. We still need more of those stories, but like there's something about, really moving away from old stereotypes of what queer characters have been on film and television, in the fact that this is just like an awesome character that you relate to, hopefully, or that you respond to in a way that's like, that does something to you, that's, that their sexuality and their identity is kind of incidental. Like for me in life, like I'm not, I don't know, that it's, I respond to those kind of characters, I guess. And then from my point, sort of lean away from anything that feels like an old trope. I also just, it's such an opportunity because we don't, there's much more, but we still lack sort of queer representation in media. There's an opportunity always that I'm excited about, of like, how can we kind of nudge people's boundaries a bit, or for people who are, don't have a connection point for queer people, like how can we make that connection? How can we, all connect in our humanity rather than judge each other for what we don't understand? So I get excited by that opportunity in playing gay characters, and one of the ways that that sort of manifests in my work is to lean away from anything that feels like an old story or like an old stereotype or whatever.
And it's interesting too, because I think we are, as you said, slowly but surely getting to a place where the representation doesn't have to be the singular one representation, because it's really the only example. Like I remember when Looking came out, there was such discourse, to say the least, surrounding it, because the gay community felt like, I don't see myself in this character. This doesn't represent me, and therefore we have to complain about it. But I think it's interesting to see a decade later how we've moved to a place where we don't have to be necessarily so nitpicky about the representation, because we're not looking at just one example anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. But also, I think it's completely understandable when there is limited representation. Of course, we all want to be represented, but it's pretty impossible to do that. And I think in a way, it's a mistake to, while I think it's, always keeping in mind diversity in terms of just reflecting the world that we actually live in and the diversity that exists in that world. But trying to represent everything and everyone in one story or one character or two characters, or, is possibly gonna take you down a really difficult road where you're trying to overgeneralize, and like, so, characters are very specific, and so to work, I think, like, they need to be very specific. So to try and pack, the entire community into one or two characters is just going to be, I don't know. I don't think it's going to work out very well. But yeah.
I wanted to ask you about because this is a TV show about internet sex culture and the ways that people go online to find the things that make them sexually happy. I wanted to ask you about shooting and filming your gay sex scenes that you've done in a few of your shows, because we live in a world now where those scenes are ripped and put online, and they exist online for people to rewatch over and over again because they think they're hot and all that kind of stuff. And I'm curious how you feel about that. That first of all, you get to be a person who is in something that's still rare, which is shooting gay sex scenes, and something that clearly people are interested in based on, for example, the success of Heated Rivalry recently. But how does it feel for you that they are sort of taken for posterity and posted online for people to rewatch over and over again?
That the way I feel about it is that's the world we live in right now. I mean, there's some parts of it that sucks. I think it makes me feel even more sort of discerning about then what are we putting on camera here? Like, does it serve the story? What is it about? Is it just showing hot bodies and maybe that's what we want, or is this scene about intimacy? And I think like Andrew Haigh, filmmaker Andrew Haigh, who made Weekend and many, many, many other films. One of the things that I think he does so beautifully is he shoots very, very kind of honest, intimate scenes, sex scenes, and he shoots a lot of them close often. And I find that sexier most of the time than when you're seeing all the bodies, because when you see that real kind of connection between people and it's close, you can't fake that. You can make people look pretty with lights and do all that stuff and do all the hot moves or whatever. But so I think it's as actors you want to you want to be really discerning about if you're showing your body in any sort of a form of nakedness, what's the reason for it? How does it serve the story? Is it justified? And what would we feel proud of and comfortable with, knowing that the world we live in, people are going to tape bits of it and put it, on the internet. But really, you can't be concerned about that. What we can be concerned about is doing stuff that we're proud of and feel comfortable with, and obviously feel safe to do, and all of that kind of stuff that is serving the story we're telling. And one of the things that I've loved in doing having the opportunity to sort of tell a story through a gay sex scene is that all this emphasis has been put on the physicality of gay sex and what that is, and people being freaked out about it. Some people who don't understand or don't just are not conservative in that way, missing the whole point that this is about intimacy. This is about people connecting. Not always, but there's an opportunity in a lot of the sort of intimate scenes that I've done that it's about the intimacy and these people connecting. And so there's a possibility to break through all this stuff about, it's not just a physical thing. It's about attraction between two people. And so I relish that kind of opportunity to show that in intimate scenes.
And it's still sort of a brave new world. I mean, I had Andrew Rannells, your co-star from Welcome to Chippendales, on here recently.
Oh, I love Andrew.
And he was telling me a story about how when he was on Girls, he had to instruct the crew and the director on what missionary sex was like for gay men, because they didn't even know that was a possibility. They didn't think that they had one image in their mind and thought that was the only way that could happen. And I thought that was really fascinating, that even a show that was as sexually progressive as Girls was. The people involved in making it had to be instructed by the star on how gay men have sex.
Yeah, we had a very similar situation on Looking, where people. I can't remember who it was now. I think it may have been our DP at the time, but I may be wrong about that. This awesome woman, she was like, "Wow, I really got an education." But we got a lot of responses for there were some sex scenes that were between two men in missionary position, and we got similar responses from people. You're like, "Oh wow, there's a chance to educate through intimate scenes, not just the physicality. In fact, that's sort of secondary or sort of incidental, I think, but just showing the connection between two people,
And speaking of educating, we had another one of your co-stars, Jake Lacey, on the podcast recently too. And we were reminiscing about the White Lotus, and in particularly the iconic scene of the rim job in the manager's office. And he was talking me through all the different takes he did and different reactions that he had, and try to figure out what the proper sort of shock and being aghast would be like for him. But again, I do also think that was maybe an educational moment for a lot of people watching television who maybe did not understand that.
Right, yeah. I think, I don't know which take they used, but I think probably the best take was the first time they opened the door and saw us doing that, because I'm pretty sure they didn't know that that's what we were doing. Because Lucas, who I was doing the scene with, and I had pitched that idea to Mike, and Mike was like, "Can we do that?" And then we were like, "Well, we think so." He was totally on board, obviously, but then I don't think that he spread the news to the other cast members who were bursting in on us. So there was some genuine shock and awe, I think, when they opened the door.
Oh my gosh. I mean, the White Lotus is, one of my favorite things to talk about, because it's just, everyone is obsessed with that show, obsessed with the logos in the background. So it's always so rich for discussion, and people reminisce about the past seasons all the time. I feel like, earlier I listed off a bunch of these, prestige television shows that you've been on. I feel like that show must have completely altered the path of your career.
Absolutely, yeah, it was extraordinary. And what was so amazing about it is that we kind of had no idea that that's what would happen with that show. We shot it. The scripts were brilliant, and Mike is brilliant, and it's an incredible cast, and so we knew that we had something special. But it was very early on in COVID. I think we were one of the first, shows to go into production, and we were making it literally in a bubble. And, Mike made another show, Enlightened,
the best, one of the best shows ever.
So great. But that show, I think probably has a cult following, but when it aired was kind of a niche show. It didn't have the kind of reach that White Lotus had. So I think a lot of us were like, this is going to be an awesome show that will probably follow that sort of, path. So yeah, it was shocking and amazing that it resonated so intensely with people, and it absolutely altered everything for me professionally in amazing ways. Kind of a little overwhelming in the beginning because it was just so unexpected. But just it's been I already worshipped Mike White, but I will forever be thankful for giving me the chance to play that incredible role that he wrote. Just amazing. But it really it blew things open for me in such a great way.
When you're on other sets now, do people, ask you to put in a good word with Mike White for them? Can you get me on the next season?
No one's outright asked for that, but maybe there's been some sort of, I don't know. Maybe people have hinted at it. I've missed it. But no, I think, it's one of those shows that is like, I think most people would love a chance to be on it. So I think people are sort of would be, reluctant to ask because there's sort of reverence around the show to a certain extent, which is awesome. I mean, well earned. Mike is just extraordinary, and I know the seasons have been different, and there's been sort of different reactions to them, but I just think he's brilliant, and every season has been amazing. So I'm excited to see what happens next.
I think about you a lot, and also Jennifer Coolidge, because there's always conversation bubbling up about an all-star White Lotus season, and it must be so torturous for you because your character isn't alive anymore. Neither is Jennifer's.
Well, yeah, I wonder where those things come from. Whether it comes from like something that could be real, but I mean, it's from the mind of Mike White. Honestly, it could happen in the afterlife. Like you really don't know. And on the night before we started shooting the first season, we had this big dinner, and he announced that there would be a prize for the person who at the end of the shoot was the nicest person and the best actor, and they get a spin-off series. And I was like, hello. And he was like, we could just go back in time. So who knows? Maybe I could appear in flashbacks. Maybe it'll be maybe there'll be, I don't know, parallel realms that you visit. I mean, he could really do anything. He's been on The Amazing Race and Survivor, for God's sake. That man is just like boundless.
He showed up on Survivor with an amazing 6-pack of abs. I was like, who knew that Mike White had that?
Yeah, I mean, he does the impossible.
Yeah. I did want to ask you about one more thing. Because of my job, I cover TV and pop culture for work. People are always wanting to talk to me about the things that they love, that they're obsessed with. And I don't think I've ever had more people talk to me about something that they were so into than the episode that you did of The Last of Us with Nick Offerman.
Right.
So many people reach out to me about that episode and how just beautiful they thought it was, how much they loved it. I mean, if that's happening to me and I had nothing to do with it, I can't imagine what it's like what has been like for you to have people be so fond of that episode.
Yeah, it's been incredibly beautiful, and very, very unique. Like I've never felt something like a response like that, and amplified by the fact that we loved that story so much, and we responded to it just reading it in the way that people responded to seeing it. So it was, it's beautiful to have people respond to what you do. It's like it's extra beautiful when it's something that you've poured your heart into and you're really proud of. And again, like we were talking before, like it's very, very, very rare to see a love story, a same-sex love story like that. I mean, it was so gorgeously written, and also like we were saying before, it's and Nick Offerman said this when he in his acceptance speech for the Emmy, which he so deservedly won, something about when people say something about like I'm not interested in a gay story, and he says it's a love story, asshole. And it's it's a love story first and foremost. Those two people could be any sexuality, any gender. They happen to be two men. It's just a gorgeous, gorgeous love story, and it's so beautifully conceived in that everyone seemed to respond to that, not about who are these people that it's this gorgeous love story, and it doesn't matter, what bits they've got and what who how they identify. It's just this gorgeous gorgeous love story. So it's one of the things that I feel so lucky that I got to be in it, and so fiercely proud of what we tried to do. And then to feel that kind of tidal wave of a response was amazing. And that there was a lot of women who responded by saying, I looked over and my husband, who's never watched a gay love story, is just bawling. And many, 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 many stories like that. Just, that's what you want to do. That's what we were talking about before. You want to nudge people's minds and hearts open, or blast them open, So feeling that we were able to do that with that story was just awesome.
Yeah. And I think you just hit on what is the incredible and remarkable thing about that episode of that show in particular, is that it was a series based on a video game with zombies running around and horror elements. Those are not things that are typically associated with a tender same-sex romance. And like you said, they could have made those characters a straight couple, but instead they had this beautiful love story between two men. And it is not the audience that is typically exposed to that.
Yeah, which is, it's the genius of that storytelling, I think, also, is that it completely takes you by surprise, that love story encased in this, amazing, scary sort of post-apocalyptic video game kind of world. And before you have a chance, it disarms you. So before you have a chance to judge it, you're thrust into this story and kind of feeling this love story, before you can build up walls or defenses against it, because it's so unexpected. And it's really brilliant writing.
Well, speaking of brilliant, Maximum Pleasure Guaranteed, its finale is coming out on July 15th, I believe. And I've seen it, and it is truly wild.
Yes.
Your character comes back for a surprise, to say the least.
Yes. Which wasn't originally in the show, I might say, but the amazing creator was like, I've had this idea. And maybe we can talk about that another time after people have watched it.
Yeah, we will not be spoiling that for people, but it is very good.
It's a wild ride right to the end, which is awesome.
Yes. Well, Murray, thank you so much for doing this. I had a blast chatting with you. I have been, as we said, obsessed with you for a very long time. So this was very fun.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me on. It's been lovely talking to you.
Thank you, Murray. That was so much fun. You are so nice and so funny. So thanks for doing this. And of course, we want to hear from you. Do you think that there's hope for Murray Bartlett to return to the White Lotus? Let us know. And as always, subscribe to us on YouTube at The Obsessed Channel. Follow us wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like me, follow me on Substack at obsessed.substack.com. Thanks to our producer, Rachel Passer, and we'll see you next time.